Section 7.1 then establishes the principles of monetization as indispensable matters of deciding not only monetary solution, but also the necessary strictures of a transformation to actual just economy. We are compelled to establish the only legitimate sustaining principles of monetization. 1. Purpose of money and monetization. As a purpose of money as a vital facility of trade, if not the sole just purpose of money, is unsubverted representation of property, as is indispensable to the just reward of truly free enterprise. Because to reap just reward, or like reward, true free enterprise must for its endeavors receive undiminished, like volumes and qualities of property in trade. Thus, any definition of money and principle for monetizing wealth are only without power to inflict injustice if they sustain all desirable prosperity, entirely without redundant or incommensurable cost, for nothing less can render just reward. Thus, the only just definition of money and principle for monetizing wealth immutably tokenizes both value and disposition in regard to any and every process of the subject system. Because if money increases in effective value, then the wealth of property holders and the prospective capacity to fulfill promissory obligations is generally decreased. Because if money decreases in effective value, then the wealth of possessors of money is generally decreased. And because, if any obfuscation of the tokenization or disposition imposes any redundant or incommensurable cost, then as that cost takes from the overall pool of wealth or disposes the volume of circulation in disproportion to contribution, then to the extent that it does so, that redundant or incommensurable cost makes it impossible for producers of wealth to be rewarded commensurably for their contributions, which, to this extent, and even to a potentially terminal extent, nullifies the very most important principles and purposes not only of truly free enterprise and markets, but of actual economy or eradication of redundant cost itself. In section 7.2 then, we prove our fact of one mathematically perfected economy, in part that we cannot be denied our right to mathematically perfected economy. Although we have covered these points in various manners, the language and teeth of this and related sections deserve our attention. 1. Singular solution of circulatory inflation, circulatory deflation, and maldisposition. Circulatory inflation, deflation, and maldisposition in respect to represented property are solved only by monetization of property in a circulation of promissory obligations embodying an eradication of interest and schedule of payment retiring principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property. 1a. For nothing other than monetization of all property, eradication of interest, and exactly this pattern of payment altogether solves circulatory inflation, deflation, and maldisposition. 2. Singular solution of systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property. Systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property is solved only by the integral combination of our first and third solutions. 2a. as only their inseparable combination eliminates every systemic power, either to dispossess or to subvert vital proportion and disposition. 3. Singular solution of inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial, falsified indebtedness by purported interest. Inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness in proportion to a circulation or remaining capacity to service debt is solved only by eradication of interest. 3a. Because a fact of owing interest from and beyond a vital circulation, which can be comprised at most of only some remaining principal, comprises an implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation under the vicious ruse of purported banking. 3b. Because it is the resultant necessary reborrowing of interest to replenish a vital circulation, which multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to a circulation or remaining capacity to service artificial debt. 3c. And because neither the principal nor the interest of the present obfuscation of the promissory obligation are even rightful properties of purported banks. Because the purported banking system is not an actual creditor. On the contrary, the purported banking system merely intervenes upon the natural rules both of the actual creditors who give up the property acquired for promissory obligations and of obligors who monetize production by issuing promissory obligations. The purported banking system does this merely to publish the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. And so, as the purported banking system never gives up property relative and commensurable with the promissory obligation, never does a lawful consideration exist which comprises even a debt of the principal to the purported banking system. C2. Neither, therefore, does any actual risk exist, particularly as would be sufficient to justify purported interest. 2a. On the contrary, the only possible risk to the purported banking system is the mere negligible cost of publishing the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. 2b. And this mere negligible cost is regularly recouped, in fact, in a tiny fraction of the first payment of practically any resultant obfuscated obligation. C3. Thus, it is no more than a perpetual lie that we borrow money from banks, or that risk justifies interest, for in fact no risk exists to a central bank but discovery of the nature and extent of its thievery, particularly as no such money can ever exist but by our own actual issuance of promissory obligations. 4. Conclusive fact of singular integral solution. Nothing else and nothing less, therefore, sustains every requisite of just economy concurrently for every issue and case of examination, and even without any need for regulation or manual compensation, but exactly such a mathematically perfected economy. 4. A. Only eradication of interest and this inseparable schedule of payment solve every requisite, not only for the entire system, but in the case of every cycle of affairs within the entire system. 1. Even accomplishing this purpose without a need for manual regulation by no more than its obligatory schedule of payment. 1b. Likewise then, by reducing intrinsic issues to mere accounting, only mathematically perfected economy can deliver the ultimate object of economy, which is to eliminate all redundant cost. And 1b. Neither then can true free markets, true free enterprise, or even true economy exist, but in mathematically perfected economy, for anything less suffers at least either injustice, impediment, or inefficiency. In section 7.3 then, we establish the lawful authority to monetize. The only lawful authority to execute our monetization of promissory obligations according to these necessary standards shall be a common monetary foundry, which shall comprise a vital branch of representative government, which shall be subject to all insurances, regulation, and criminal penalties necessary to a fact of absolute consensual representation, which shall abide strictly by the fundamental principles of mathematically perfected economy, the duties of which, in every reasonable case, shall extend every practical benefit of automation, and which duties therefore shall strictly be: 1. Certification of creditworthiness over proprietary determinate lifespans of related property. To certify creditworthiness for a proprietary determinate lifespan of related property according to agreed legitimate standards, where, for the sake of determining rate of payment over a justified integral time span, the proprietary determinate lifespan of the related property shall be a period over which a property must be considered to be consumed by facts commencing at a moment of initial consumption and ending when either 1. The property is delivered to further parties assuming a new promissory obligation which essentially ends the applicable period of the preceding promissory obligation. 2. Or ending when the property endures to a further point short of the potential longevity of the property itself, but beyond which the property cannot be expected to be consumed either by the obligated party or further obligated parties. 3. Or ending at a point determined by the actual lifespan of a property, which by virtue of both conducive rates of depreciation or consumption or payment, and perpetual desirability of the property over its actual lifespan, a promissory obligation can be expected to be sustained by further parties willing to assume the remaining obligation across the whole natural lifespan of the property. The proprietary determinate lifespan, therefore, is the minimum of these prospectively applicable lifespans, because neither the integrity of the currency or the integrity of promissory obligations can be maintained unless fulfillment